Hi, welcome to Vyom Vertigo, a celebration of movies and stories, where today we are going to be talking about why India will never be absolute cinema. Now, before we dig deep into this topic, we first need to understand what absolute cinema means. No, it's not the Martin Scorsese meme, as much as I wish it would be true, but for the intents of this video, absolute cinema basically means movies that make you, as the audience, think. Any movie that makes you think, that makes you reflect upon yourself, that makes you ponder, can be considered absolute cinema. It is as simple as that. So, with that out of the way, let us dig deep into the topic of why India will never be absolute cinema. This video will be divided into three sections: the past, the present, and the future. So, let's jump right into it. For any cinema to be considered absolute, it has to start with a movement. And you see that all throughout different nations across the world. You see that in the form of American cinema, you see that in the form of French New Wave, Italian neoculturalism, Hong Kong cinema, Japanese gun fu in the form of African cinema, South American cinema, even Australian cinema. The sad part is India used to have one of that, but that has completely ended. India has had only three cinema movements, and I would consider there to be only one, that being parallel cinema. What does parallel cinema mean? Parallel cinema was basically a movement started by Satyajit Ray and other directors who felt that the current mainstream Indian cinema was too much entertainment oriented. We needed to create something that was thought provoking, that reflected the human psychology, the human sentience, and something that made the audiences think. That was their goal. And it was a wonderful goal, and the movies that they created throughout that moment were fantastic to say the least. Earlier, you had Alfred Hitchcock, which then led on to Francis Ford Coppola, which then led on to Steven Spielberg, which then led on to directors like Christopher Nolan, which then leads on to the current batch of directors from someone like, say, Curry Baker, Kane Parsons, or even Zach Krieger. There's been a lineage of directors throughout. In India, anytime the list of great directors pop up, it's the same old names repeated throughout. Be it Satyajit Ray, be it Rishikesh Mukherjee, Shyam Benegal. In the modern times, it would most probably be someone like three names: Vikramaditya Motwane, Anurag Kashyap, and Sanjay Leela Bhansali. And that is the saddening part. It started with Satyajit Ray, it ended with Satyajit Ray. It did not carry forward in a meaningful manner. Because earlier, all these directors, be it like Shyam Benegal, Satyajit Ray, even Rishikesh Mukherjee, they created thought-provoking cinema that was commercially viable. Now, even though Vikramaditya Motwane and Anurag Kashyap are the greats, but do they fill out theatres? Do they even fill out half of the theatres? Absolutely not. Maybe Sanjay Leela Bhansali, but he takes so long to create movies that basically an entire election passes before he makes a new film. Yeah, what can I say? I would not consider him to be one of the greats because it just takes a whole lot of time for him to create one good movie. And that leads me to the present, where basically throughout time and after enough advancements, you would expect a nation's cinema to move forward. But in India, there has been the opposite case, where basically earlier you had films like Guide, Anand, Mother India, Mughal Azam to be these major hits. Now, those kind of films do not get made. And the answer is very simple. There is simply a dearth of creativity from Indian audiences as well and the creators as well. Now, you take a look at the state of Indian cinema. It is all either IP driven, actor driven, or real story driven. There are no original thoughts being passed around. And it's not the problem strictly with commercial cinema. In the art house cinema as well, this kind of suffocation of ideas is being seen as well. Think of it this way. What are the most majorly known, the indie darlings that Indian cinema has produced? The top three that pop in my mind are Homebound, Supervisor of Malegaon, and 12th Fail. All three films are based on real people. Take that aspect of it, do you think these directors would have created something as important and profound if these people did not exist? My answer to that is absolute and vehement no. And this degradation is clearly visible in the box office earnings as well. Earlier, films like Guide would be super hit. Then movies like Masan were semi-hits. And now movies like Three of Us are passed straight to Netflix. That is the state that we find ourselves in. And the biggest culprit of this degradation of Indian cinema is us, the audiences. Simply put, we do not have taste. Where American cinema, its directors, its producers, and its distributors can reasonably bet that if an idea is good enough, if an idea is original enough, the audiences will come in enough numbers to generate a profit. That is the idea that they go by. That is why films like Backrooms get 10 million budget. That is why Obsession gets a budget of $750,000, but close to $14 million are spent on advertising. That kind of scenario is not created in Indian cinema, and the answer to that is quite simple. Why? because we as an Indian audiences are dumb and monotonic in nature. What do I mean by monotonic? Well, basically, Indian audiences crave the same thing. I'll give you two examples. Angry Young Men was all the rage back when Amitabh Bachchan came into the scene. Angry Young Men is all the rage that is even now in films like say Dhurandhar, Kabir Singh, Animal, or even currently about to release Toxic. No change whatsoever. Or even in OTT space, where the first Netflix original from India was Sacred Games. Rather than getting the idea for it to be a new launchpad for creative voices, what the creators understood was that Indian audiences crave sex, violence, and demented words, so let's just give them that over and over and over again. That is why you will never see anything as good as Sacred Games even to this day, even after so many advancements into Indian thinking and Indian ideas, because we as audiences are dumb. And all this culminates in the fact that over the course of the present, India has only had three kind of ideas for its cinema. Either based on real events, either be based on some kind of a horror comedy, or either be based on some kind of an IP or a sequel that people recognize. Other than these three things, audience does not have a care. That is why films like Baby Do Do will basically die. That is why films like Maya Sabha do not succeed. That is why a gem of a film that is three of us gets straight released to Netflix, because we as an Indian audiences have actually degraded from the past to the present. So with all that being said, what does the future hold? And honestly, nothing. India will never be able to create thought-provoking cinema. We will always be known as the commercial cinema that gave us the massy elements. That is why film like Varanasi will be celebrated into the theaters, will be celebrated by the foreign audiences as well, but will never be considered as an actual thought-provoking think piece. That is never going to happen until and unless the Indian audiences start to reject that. And honestly, I was naive enough to think that maybe this change will come by the release of a film like Dhurandhar. I thought this would lead on to more creative voices, that directors should trust their own instinct and to create something that they believe in. I thought that was the takeaway that should have been from Dhurandhar, but no. The takeaway was in the form that we need to create films on real events, we need to have them done in a gritty avatar, and we need to create the soundtrack that is a fusion of English and Hindi old songs. Combine them together and you get a winning formula. That is the takeaway that we got. So how do you expect cinema to succeed when even the future looks so bleak? Because I really don't think there are any creative voices that can sell tickets on their own ideas. I do not think the Indian audiences will be smart enough to judge a movie based on its merits and not on its ideology and not on its colors. I do not think that India will ever be able to succeed in the form of being a thought-provoking cinema. We will always remain the land, the people, the ideas of song, dance, and a wholesome package. That is all we will ever be until and unless the audience's mindset changes. So yeah, those were my thoughts on why India will never be absolute cinema. What do you think? Do you think India has some kind of hope to revive its glory back? I don't think so, but what do you think? Share your thoughts down below and I'll see you next time.